indie publishing, indie writing community, whatever. The thing that keeps coming back in my brain, it seems to be the conversation that people are having is nothing to do with books. And I know that sounds ridiculous when you're talking about publishing books, but please stay with me. And whenever I end up in one of these self-publishing discussions, the book itself always feels kind of secondary. The story is secondary, the writing is secondary. The question isn't, is it good? The question is, what's your budget? And maybe that's unfair, maybe that's me being a bit cynical, but I genuinely feel like I spent more time hearing about launch plans than novels online. I hear more about ad campaigns than characters, more about newsletter funnels than plots, more about special editions than writing. And look, maybe that's because writing is the boring part. Writing takes years. Writing isn't sexy. Nobody wants to hear about you spent 3 years staring at a screen, deleting entire chapters, rewriting screens, wondering if you completely lost your mind, and questioning every decision that led you to chapter 17. People would rather talk about sprayed edges, and that's fine. I understand it. The marketing side is easier to show. It's easier to post on Instagram, make a YouTube video about. It's easier to sell. But surely at some point the book, the actual book has to matter. Because here's the thing I can't get past. I've been around online book spaces for a very long time. Long enough to watch trends come and go, long enough to watch entire communities reinvent themselves every few years. Long enough to remember when self-publishing was almost treated like a rebellion. The whole point was you didn't need permission. You didn't need an agent. You didn't need a publisher. You didn't need somebody sitting in an office deciding whether your story deserved to exist. You wrote it, you put it out there. Readers decided, simple. Or at least that was the dream. Now, when I've come to listen to some conversation around self-publishing, it feels like we've accidentally rebuilt the entire system we were trying to escape from. Where the entire ecosystem is the writer paying for everything. And I don't mean that as an attack, because every single person, service, every person there has value. I mean, editors matters, cover artist matters, formatters matter. Wow, try saying that 10 times fast. Proofreaders matter. People deserve to be paid for their work. This isn't me saying nobody should hire professionals. In fact, I'm very pro-professional. That's not the argument. The argument is that somewhere along the way, those things stopped being treated as useful tools and started being treated as a requirement. And those are two very different things. Because if you spend long enough in writing spaces, eventually you start seeing advice that basically sounds like you need a developmental editor, then the copy editor, the proofreading, the professional cover, the professional formatter, the character art, the website, the newsletter, the advertising, the promotional service, the advanced reader copies, the launch team, the social media graphics, the special editions, the merchandising, and then more advertising. And somewhere in the middle of that, I just think to myself, what exactly am I supposed to write the bloody book? Because it starts sounding less like writing advice, more like instructions for launching a small business with the quintessential girl boss mug on your desk. Maybe that's the reality now. Maybe that genuinely is what it takes to compete. But if that's true, I think we should at least be honest about it, because there are a lot of writers are sitting there wondering why they feel overwhelmed, and honestly, I don't blame them. Most writers are not wealthy. Most writers are not sitting on a pile of disposable income. Most writers are normal people working normal jobs, paying bills, raising children, mortgages, school fees, bills, life. They're caring for family members and then trying to squeeze writing into whatever little corner of life they can still find. An hour before work, half an hour before bed, 10 minutes during lunch. That's the reality for a huge number of writers. And then those writers go online and see discussions that make it sound like publishing a book requires a budget of a small house renovation. Of course people get discouraged. Of course they do. Because suddenly the barrier isn't writing the book anymore. The barrier becomes affording the process. And that's where it starts feeling a little uncomfortable, because self-publishing was supposed to lower those barriers, not create new ones. And here's the thing. Even if you do everything right, even if you spend the money, even if you buy every service, even if your cover is perfect, even if your launch is perfect, even if your marketing is perfect, success is not guaranteed. That's the part nobody really talks about. The market is flooded. There are more books being published than ever before. Readers have more options than ever before. And every day, thousands of books appear. Some of them are brilliant. Most of them aren't. But they're all competing for attention, and attention is limited. It's a finite resource. So you can spend thousands of dollars to create the perfect launch and still disappear into a void. And it's not because you're untalented, and it's not because your book's bad. Simply because there are too many books. That's the reality. Most self-publishing books will never become a huge success. A good number will not sell thousands of copies. Most won't change the author's life, let alone a few hundred copies, by the way. Most will never become a full-time career. And that's not pessimism, that's statistics. The success stories, and we all know the success stories, those are real. But they're also the stories we hear because they're unusual. Nobody makes a YouTube video called "I published a book and it sold 12 copies." Although honestly, I'd probably watch that. At least it would be honest. The reality is that most writers write because they love writing. And I think that's where we start losing sight of that. Everything becomes content, becomes marketing, growth strategies, monetization. And before long, writing starts feeling suspiciously like every corner of the internet. Turn your hobby into a business. Turn your passion into a brand. Turn yourself into a product. Optimize, scale, monetize, repeat. Maybe I'm just getting old. That's always possible. I've reached the age where I occasionally hear myself think, oh good grief, I sound like somebody's granddad. But I genuinely miss the simplicity of the conversations. I miss people getting excited about their stories. I miss people talking about weird books. I miss people taking chances. I miss the idea that someone could write a novel because they had a story they desperately wanted to tell, not because they had a business plan, not because they had a podcast, not because they had a marketing strategy, not because they have a 5-year growth projection. Just because they had a story and they wanted to share it. Maybe that's just old-fashioned and unrealistic in 2026. Maybe indie publishing has simply changed. That's entirely possible. But I still believe a good story matters more than budget, and I believe great writers can come from anywhere. And I still believe some of the best books in the world are written by people who don't have thousands of dollars to spend. And I still think self-publishing works best when it gives people the opportunity they wouldn't otherwise have had. Because once we start treating money as proof of quality, I think we lose something important. That with a $1,000 book cover doesn't make a bad book good. A huge advertising budget doesn't make a bad book good. Special editions don't make your book good. Merchandising doesn't make your book good. At some point it still comes back to the story, and it will always come back to the story. Or at least I think it should. Maybe that's why this conversation keeps rattling around my head, because I can't help but wonder if we've reached a point where the book has become the least interesting part of publishing. And if that's true, I think there's a much bigger problem than whether somebody can afford a fancy cover. I've talked about this before. There are other videos. You're welcome to check them out. Like, sub, share my video everywhere. Tell me what you think. Hype this video. And if you want to get part of the conversation, check out my memberships and Patreon, as well as Substack. I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.